Part 1. Before Bro Country. What if the most successful duo in modern country music accidentally created an entire genre, then spent the next decade being blamed for it? One song shattered records that had stood for generations. It brought hip-hop, rock, and country together in a way Nashville had never seen before. Millions of fans couldn't get enough. Traditionalists said it was destroying country music itself. Along the way, two best friends became superstars, changed an entire industry, and slowly grew into two very different people. This is the rise and fall of Florida-Georgia line. From bro country pioneers to a duo divided, country music has always reinvented itself. Every generation believes the one before it had things right. Every generation accuses the next of ruining everything. When Elvis appeared, traditionalists panicked. When Willie Nelson grew his hair long, Nashville executives rolled their eyes. When Garth Brooks brought arena rock to country music, critics insisted he was turning concerts into spectacles instead of storytelling. History has a funny way of repeating itself. By the late 2000s, Nashville was ready for another revolution. It just didn't know it yet. Hundreds of young musicians poured into the city every year, each convinced they would become the next great country star. Most never made it past songwriter rounds in tiny bars. A lucky few earned publishing deals. Almost nobody changed the direction of the entire genre. Tyler Hubbard never expected to be one of them. Raised in Monroe, Georgia, Hubbard grew up surrounded by country music and church hymns. Music wasn't simply entertainment in his family, it was part of everyday life. He learned guitar young and started writing songs long before he imagined performing them for thousands of people. Friends remembered him as competitive, driven, always writing, always thinking about the next song. Several hundred miles away in Ormond Beach, Florida, Brian Kelley was following a different path. Kelley loved country music just as much, but his influences stretched beyond Nashville. Southern rock, beach music, even a little hip-hop found its way into his playlists. He carried himself with an easy confidence that made people instantly comfortable. On paper, they didn't have much in common. One was intensely focused. The other seemed almost effortlessly laid back. Together, they would become something neither could have predicted. In 2008, both young men arrived at Belmont University in Nashville. Belmont has quietly become one of the most important launching pads in modern country music. Walk its campus long enough, and you're likely to hear future hit songs drifting from practice rooms before anyone outside the building knows they exist. It was there that Hubbard and Kelley met. Not through an audition, not through a record label, not because someone planned to pair them together. They simply started talking. The conversation turned into a songwriting session. The songwriting session became a friendship. The friendship became late nights with acoustic guitars spread across apartment living rooms, pizza boxes stacked on coffee tables, and notebooks filled with half-finished lyrics. The songs weren't polished. Most never left the room. But something important was happening. The two wrote differently. Tyler gravitated towards structure. Brian chased ideas. Tyler often found the hook. Brian found the attitude. Instead of competing, they complemented one another. The more they wrote together, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just another songwriting partnership. Meanwhile, Nashville itself was changing. Country radio had become increasingly polished. Ballads dominated playlists. The influence of artists like Rascal Flatts, Keith Urban, and Sugarland had pushed production toward a bigger, more contemporary sound. But outside the city, another audience was growing. College students, tailgaters, young country fans who listened to Kenny Chesney one minute and Lil Wayne the next. They weren't interested in musical boundaries. They simply wanted songs that sounded like their lives. Nobody in Nashville was writing for them. Not yet. Hubbard and Kelley weren't trying to start a movement. They were simply writing the music they enjoyed. Songs about trucks, summer nights, pretty girls, cold beer, open highways, small-town weekends, life as they actually lived it. Some industry veterans dismissed the material as lightweight, too casual, too amodern, too influenced by rock and hip-hop. But younger audiences immediately understood it. The songs weren't pretending to be country. They were describing what country kids were actually listening to. That distinction would prove enormous. Before long, the pair began performing around Nashville under a new name. Florida, Georgia, two home states, one identity. Florida Georgia Line. The name sounded almost accidental. Like the band itself, crowds responded immediately, not because the duo had perfected their sound, but because it felt different, loose, fun, unfiltered. There was an energy in the room that traditional country acts often lacked. Word began spreading. Small crowds became larger ones. Industry insiders quietly started showing up. One of them was producer Joey Moy. Fresh from his work with Nickelback, Moy heard something most Nashville producers missed. He wasn't interested in making Florida Georgia Line sound like everyone else. He wanted them to sound even more like themselves. It was a gamble, one that would soon produce one of the biggest records in country music history. But first, they needed one song, a song so unexpected. It would permanently change the sound of country music. Part 2, the song that changed country music. Sometimes history doesn't announce itself. It slips quietly into the room. No headlines, no fanfare, just a song. For Florida Georgia Line, that song was Cruise. Ironically, it wasn't written with the intention of changing country music. It was written because Hubbard and Brian Kelley wanted to capture a feeling. The windows down, the sun setting, back roads stretching toward nowhere in particular. A girl sitting beside you. The radio turned up. It wasn't about telling a complicated story. It was about creating a moment. That simplicity would become its greatest strength. By the time Hubbard and Kelley brought the song into the studio, producer Joey Moy already believed he had found something different. Moy wasn't a traditional Nashville producer. He had built his reputation working with Canadian rock bands, most notably Nickelback. That background mattered. Where many country producers still thought in terms of fiddles and steel guitars, Moy thought in layers. Massive drums, wide guitars, thick vocal harmonies, hooks that stayed with listeners long after the song ended. Instead of sanding off Florida Georgia Line's rough edges to fit Nashville's expectations, he leaned into them. Electric guitars sat comfortably beside banjos. Country lyrics met rock production. Hip-hop rhythms slipped quietly underneath traditional melodies. Some people inside the industry weren't sure what they were hearing. Was it country, rock, pop? The answer was becoming less important, because it sounded fresh. Tyler's lead vocal carried the easy confidence of someone telling a story to friends around a bonfire. Brian's harmonies added warmth rather than competition. The production felt enormous, yet somehow relaxed. Nothing about it sounded forced. The chorus arrived like a summer memory everyone wished they had lived. Baby, you a song, you make me want to roll my windows down and cruise. It was impossible not to sing along. Inside the studio, there was excitement. Outside the studio, there was uncertainty. Country radio had never heard anything quite like it. The lyrics were casual, the groove borrowed from rock. The production pushed far beyond traditional Nashville. Some executives worried it might be too different. Others worried it wasn't different enough. Nobody could predict what happened next. When Cruise was released in 2012, listeners responded almost immediately. Radio requests poured in. Streaming numbers exploded. Concert crowds began arriving, already knowing every word. Within weeks, the song climbed relentlessly toward the top of the country charts. Then it stayed there. Week after week, month after month, it became one of the longest-running #1 hits in the history of country radio. But the biggest surprise was still ahead. Around the same time, rapper Nelly happened to hear the song. He loved it. Instead of simply praising it publicly, he reached out about recording a remix. For years, country music had flirted with outside genres. This time, it fully embraced one. When the remix arrived, Nashville didn't know what to think. Traditionalists were horrified. Younger listeners couldn't stop playing it. Country stations added it. Pop stations added it. Hip-hop. Audiences discovered Florida Georgia Line. Country fans discovered Nelly. The walls separating genres suddenly looked much smaller than anyone had imagined. Commercially, it was astonishing. The remix pushed Cruise far beyond country radio and onto mainstream charts around the world. The song eventually became one of the best-selling digital country singles in history. It sold millions upon millions of copies. Awards followed. Television appearances multiplied. Arena tours replaced theaters. Overnight, Florida Georgia Line stopped being promising newcomers. They became the biggest duo in modern country music, but something even bigger was happening. Record labels are always searching for patterns. When one artist succeeds, executives immediately begin asking the same question. How do we find another one? After Cruise, every label wanted its own Florida Georgia line. Writers were encouraged to chase the same themes: tailgates, beer, trucks, back roads, bonfires, beautiful girls, summer nights. The formula spread astonishingly fast. Before long, country radio sounded different. Luke Bryan leaned further into party anthems. New artists emerged with snapback caps instead of cowboy hats. Rock guitars became louder. Hip-hop rhythms became more common. Suddenly, a new phrase appeared in music journalism: bro country. Some used it affectionately. Others practically spat the words. Critics argued the songs reduced country music to a predictable checklist of trucks, drinking, and attractive women. Supporters argued something entirely different. They believed country music was finally reflecting how younger audiences actually lived. Both sides had evidence, and neither side was willing to surrender. Ironically, Hubbard and Kelley had never set out to invent a genre. They were simply writing songs they enjoyed. History made the decision for them. Whether they liked the label or not, Florida Georgia Line had become the face of bro country. The success continued almost without interruption. Get Your Shine On, Round Here, Stay, Dirt. Each revealed another side of the duo. They weren't simply writing party songs. They could write heartbreak, nostalgia, small-town reflections, family. But public perception had already begun to harden. For many critics, every new release reinforced the same narrative. Florida Georgia Line wasn't simply successful. They had become the symbol of everything changing in country music. Some celebrated them, others blamed them. Neither reaction prepared the duo for what success would eventually cost. Because while the world saw two best friends standing shoulder to shoulder on arena stages, life off stage was quietly beginning to move in different directions. Not through one dramatic argument, not through one explosive fight, but through hundreds of small moments that slowly changed everything. The revolution had succeeded. Now came the part no one saw coming. The revolutionaries themselves were beginning to drift apart. Part 3, the cost of changing country music. Success has a strange way of rewriting the rules. When Florida Georgia Line first arrived in Nashville, they were simply trying to get noticed. Now, they had become the standard everyone else was measured against. Every record label wanted another Florida Georgia Line. Every songwriter was chasing another Cruise. Every new artist seemed to arrive wearing backward baseball caps instead of cowboy hats. Country music hadn't just embraced a new sound, it had embraced an entirely new identity. But history rarely remembers what success feels like. It remembers what success costs. By the middle of the 2000s, Florida Georgia Line seemed unstoppable. Album after album debuted near the top of the charts. Their concerts grew from theaters to arenas. Then, from arenas to amphitheaters, packed with tens of thousands of fans singing every lyric. Night after night, another city, another sold-out crowd, another sea of cell phone lights stretching to the back of the venue. From the stage, it looked like a dream. Behind the curtain, life was beginning to change. Not because Brian Kelley and Tyler Hubbard stopped respecting one another, and not because of one dramatic argument. The distance grew slowly, almost invisibly. The very things that had made them successful were beginning to pull them in different directions. Tyler Hubbard was becoming increasingly focused on songwriting and family life. As his career matured, his writing began, exploring faith, marriage, and fatherhood alongside the carefree themes that had launched the duo. Brian Kelley, meanwhile, found himself drawn towards something different. He embraced an independent, beach-inspired lifestyle. His musical interests widened. His entrepreneurial ambitions expanded beyond the band. Neither path was wrong. They simply weren't the same path anymore. Meanwhile, the criticism never stopped. Traditional country fans continued blaming Florida Georgia Line for opening the floodgates to what many called party country. Articles appeared asking whether country music had abandoned its roots. Veteran artists were repeatedly asked what they thought about bro country. Even musicians who admired Florida Georgia Line sometimes admitted they worried the industry had become too focused on formulas. The irony wasn't lost on Hubbard and Kelley. They had never sat down intending to invent a movement. They had simply written songs that reflected their own lives, yet somehow, they had become responsible for an entire era. As newer artists entered the spotlight, the influence of Florida Georgia Line became impossible to ignore. Sam Hunt blurred the line between country and R&B. Dan and Shay pushed harmonies toward contemporary pop. Morgan Wallen combined country storytelling with modern production. Some artists openly acknowledged Florida Georgia Line's influence. Others quietly built careers on doors the duo had already opened. Whether critics liked it or not, country music would never sound exactly the same again. Then came 2020. Like every touring act in the world, Florida Georgia Line suddenly found itself off the road. Concerts disappeared, tour buses stopped rolling. For artists whose lives had revolved around performing, the silence was unfamiliar. During that pause, something else happened. The world itself grew increasingly divided. Political conversations became impossible to avoid. Social media amplified every disagreement. Fans began examining artists' personal beliefs almost as closely as their music. Brian Kelley and Tyler Hubbard never turned their friendship into a public feud, but fans noticed subtle differences. They approached certain public issues differently. They surrounded themselves with different circles. Online speculation exploded. Every social media post became evidence. Every interview became another clue. Were they breaking up? Neither man confirmed it. Neither completely denied it. Instead, they kept insisting the friendship remained intact. But observers could sense something had changed. The unstoppable momentum that had carried Florida Georgia Line for more than a decade was beginning to slow. In 2021, the duo released what would become their final studio album together. Appropriately titled Life Rolls On, it reflected maturity more than revolution. The songs were thoughtful, confident, comfortable in their own skin. But the musical landscape had shifted again. The rebels had become the veterans. The innovators had become the establishment. By early 2022, both men began focusing openly on solo careers. There was no explosive press conference, no dramatic backstage confrontation, no public war of words. Just two artists acknowledging they wanted to explore different creative roads. For fans, the ending felt almost surreal. How could the duo that had once seemed inseparable simply stop? Perhaps because the breakup wasn't really sudden at all. It had been unfolding quietly for years. Friendships don't always end with shouting. Sometimes they end with distance, different priorities, different dreams, different destinations. Today, Florida Georgia Line remains one of the most successful duos in country music history. More than 40 million records sold, dozens of platinum certifications, multiple #1 singles, awards that once seemed impossible. But statistics only tell part of the story. Their true legacy lies elsewhere. Before Florida Georgia Line, country music largely spoke to its traditional audience. After Florida Georgia Line, country music confidently reached beyond it. They didn't invent crossover. Artists like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, and Rascal Flatts had already proven country could appeal to mainstream audiences. What Florida Georgia Line did differently was introduce an entirely new generation to country by blending modern production, hip-hop influences, southern rock, and youthful storytelling into something unmistakably their own. Whether you believe that strengthened country music or weakened it depends almost entirely on what you think country music is supposed to be. History is still arguing about that question, and perhaps it always will. But one thing has become impossible to deny. Before Cruise, country music sounded one way. After Cruise, it sounded another. Few artists can honestly claim they changed an entire genre. Florida Georgia Line can. Ironically, the duo that spent years singing about open highways eventually found themselves traveling separate roads. Not because one succeeded while the other failed, not because friendship disappeared overnight, but because people grow, artists evolve, and sometimes the road that brings two lives together eventually asks them to keep driving in different directions. That's the strange paradox of the Florida Georgia Line. They didn't just become the defining duo of an era. They became the dividing line in modern country music itself. And for better or worse, the road they built is one Nashville is still traveling today.